All right, hello, and welcome back to yesterlore. It has been a while, but I'm very happy to be streaming today. Now, this is going to be a very short stream, probably less than half an hour if I can help it. Not because I don't want to stream for longer, it's just I have something scheduled very soon, and I won't be able to stay for very long. But today, I want to give some updates on what's going on. You know, I've been gone for a while, but there's some things I'm actively working on, ongoing projects that will take some time until there's an end product, so I'm not going to give any deadlines for this because I'm not sure when they are. But I'm going to update on ongoing projects. And then I'm going to do some yesterlore short topic requests. So this isn't going to be one big yesterlore where I read something. More so, I'm answering short topic requests. And all of the ones I've got this time, I have some queued up for the future, but the ones I'm going to cover this time are actually all etymology requests. People want me to talk about the etymologies of some words. Now, if you have questions you want me to answer in yesterlore, go ahead and share them in the comments. If you're in the chat, you could share them now and on Twitch if you're watching this live. But if you're watching this in the future on YouTube, you can leave a comment. I read all the comments if you have a question. But yeah, today we're talking about some etymologies of some words that some fans / viewers, I don't feel comfortable calling anyone who watches me a fan, but followers / subscribers / people who watch the streams or have watched the streams in the past have asked me for some specific etymologies. Now, there are etymological resources online, and I'm certain my viewers are aware of that. I think they just want to hear me explain the etymology, because it's fun to talk about etymology, even if you could get the same information just looking it up online. So that is the plan for today. First, ongoing projects. So I am working on a paper on Old English concepts of fate. There's so much for me to cover. I'm still not even halfway done with my literature review, and there's so much literature on it. So that's very long term, but I've been working on that. I also have an Old English rune poem project. I'm not going to reveal exactly what that is, but that is something I'm working on. So look forward to that. The results will be on my website when that's done, and I'll make an announcement when it's done on the channel. I'm also working on figuring out what I want my site to look like. If you look at this little image that's semi-covered by my face right now, that's just like a very minimized version of what my website looks like currently. You could definitely find links to that wherever you're watching this. And I'm thinking of just redesigning the whole thing. At least it might not be super different, but I do want to make some changes, so that's something I'm planning. And on Patreon, I've started a series where I'm reading The Elder Gods by Stephen Pollington and sort of talking about each chapter. The first video for that, which was a very long, rambly video, I'm going to streamline them in the future, but the first video is already up on my Patreon, and so if you are interested in what I have to say about that book, consider signing up for Patreon. But those are my ongoing projects related to stuff that I do on this channel. And now we're going to get straight into some of the etymology requests. Now, I actually ignored a request that I got. Oh, hello, North Sea Poet. It's good to see you. Yeah, never seen me on here before. Yeah, it's been a while. I got some etymology requests. The first etymology request is actually one I'm not going to do, and it's the word ketchup. There are videos on ketchup and the etymology of ketchup that you can find on YouTube and elsewhere. It's kind of complicated, probably comes from a Hokkien word for fish sauce that I can't pronounce because I can't speak Hokkien. But I'm not doing that. But I am going to do mustard. Someone asked me for mustard, and mustard is fun because mustard actually just has the word must in it. Not must as in one must do something, but must as in the sort of newly fermented grape wine, typically. And the reason it's called mustard is because it used to be made with must, and sometimes it is made with must. Narcy Poet, I'm not giving you the etymology of ketchup. I actually kind of already did give you the etymology of ketchup anyway, but you could find more in-depth stuff on the internet. You'll find mustard as well, but someone really wanted to know why it's called mustard. And it's because people used to make mustard with wine, with must, the new vintage of wine. And so must to mustard. Now, there is another older word for mustard that existed in Old English, and you can find in other related languages. It's senep is the Old English word for mustard. And this is a loan from Latin sinapi, which is a loan from Greek sinapi. And the Greek word is either a loan from or related to a word in Demotic that was probably something like sinalpa, that referred to the mustard plant, the mustard flower. And that name from Demotic, ancient Egyptian sinalpa, probably is also the root of the Greek napu, which makes it into Latin as napus. And that word was also loaned into Germanic languages as the word in Old English. It's nap, which referred to like rutabagas and that kind of root vegetable. There was some kind of semantic shift that went from mustard to rutabaga. Don't know how that happened exactly. But what's interesting is that nip part, it survives in the word neep, that is used in some dialects of English to refer to rutabagas and those kinds of root vegetables, neep. But it also exists in the word turnip. The word turnip is turn neep put together into one compound, turnip. So that nip is related to the nep in senep that meant mustard. I think this one was a joke. Someone suggested this to me to give the etymology of pineapple upside down. I assumed they meant pineapple upside down cake. But I'm going to take the bait and I'm going to give the etymology of this term. So before I get into the specific etymology of the words in pineapple upside down, I'm going to explain the cake a little bit. An upside down cake, which I think some of the earliest examples of pineapple upside down and similar upside down cakes in the US are from like the 1920s. But the idea is you make the cake upside down. So you put the toppings, usually it's fruit, in the bottom of your pan. Then you put the batter on top of that. And then you bake it. And then when it comes out, you put the plate on top and you flip it over. So it's like it's cooked upside down and you make it right side up when it's done cooking. And it's nice because then the fruit kind of gets embedded into the cake as opposed to just put on top after. Or you put it on top before and it sinks in the middle and it's not great. That's kind of the idea with upside down cake. And pineapple upside down, I think there's a similar, I mostly know it from American cuisine, but I think there is something similar in Brazilian cuisine. They have a similar type of upside down cake made of with pineapple. So that's the cake, the unit pineapple upside down. Now, the components of pineapple upside down, I'm going to talk about pineapple. So it seems pretty transparently made up of pine and apple. Wait, what happened? Why? There we go. Pine and apple. So pine, like a pine tree, and apple, like the fruit. Why do we call pineapples pineapple? Pineapple actually existed in English, like the term existed in English before any English speakers ever encountered the pineapple plant that we know today, which I think is native to like southeastern Brazil and like Paraguay area. So English speakers were already using this term before we encountered that. English speakers encountered that fruit. And what pineapple referred to originally was what we now call pine cones. A pineapple was a pine cone. It's the apple of the pine. It's the fruit that comes from the pine. But when English speakers encountered pineapples, the ones we know and love today, they were like, hey, that looks like a pineapple, what we would now call a pine cone. And so that fruit became known as pineapple in English, which I think kind of pressured the original use of pineapple out of use, and alternatives that already existed, like the word that we now use pine nut for the specific nuts, but pine nut used to refer to the cone as well, and pine cone came more prominent into use to disambiguate it from the newly encountered pineapple. Now, there is a little bit of like a meme that you see in multilingual internet spaces about how odd it is that pineapple is the English word and piña is the typical Spanish word for pineapple, but many other languages, mostly European or languages that borrow from European languages, have a different word for pineapple, but it's the same word. They all share a similar word, and it's often ananas, anana, nanas, anana. There's just so many languages where this is the term for pineapple. And the first European language that loaned this in was Portuguese. And again, that kind of makes sense considering where pineapples come from. I think the original word it's Old Tupi is the language that the word comes from. I think the word is nana or nanas. I'm pretty sure it's nana without an S. And that refers to the fruit, but also more commonly the plant. I think the name for the fruit in Old Tupi is, because I think nana just means like, no, I think nana does refer to pineapple specifically. There is another word in Old Tupi, the ibakati, it means like spiny or spiky fruit, prickly fruit or something like that, and that shows up in Portuguese. Brazilian Portuguese uses a different word. I think this is abacaxi. Abacaxi is another word for pineapple that you find in Brazilian Portuguese, and this also comes from Old Tupi, and this is like something like prickly fruit. And I think the Brazilian pineapple upside down cake is called something. Gosh, I don't remember what it's called, but I think they use the term abacaxi in that dish. All right, so that's pineapple, and the other term for pineapple you see it a lot, ananas, in a lot of languages, or anana. Upside down is actually surprisingly interesting. You would think it's up plus side plus down, or like upside and then down, like the idea of an upside versus a downside. That is actually not the origin of upside down. The spelling that we have, upside down, it seems to come from like a confusion of the origin of the term with these words upside and down, probably because the second word starts with a D and upside ends with a D sound, so it's easy to hear like a D at the end of the first word rather than the beginning of the second one. It's a form of rebracketing. The origin of upside down is actually a phrase up, so, down. Now, this is an older use of so. If you've watched some of my other yesterlore videos where we read Middle English texts, which there have been quite a few at this point, so used to have a lot wider of a meaning, and so also carried all of the meaning that we now use for the word as. So if something is so, it is as. So it's up as down is sort of the breakdown of meaning here. Something is up as if it were down. Up, so, down. And there are a lot of spelling variants of up, so, down in Middle English. Sometimes it's upside down with an A, upside down, like S-E. So if you hear like upside down a lot, upside down can easily be confused with upside down if you're speaking really quickly. Upside down, upside down. Our earliest example of this actually is so old that so is still swa, like it is in Old English. And it's this example from a very famous Middle English poem. Famous for people who read Middle English, that is. It's not very widely known outside of that community, but it's called The Prick of Conscience. It's a pretty well-known Middle English poem. And here we have a verse from it. It's "Tharfor is it es richt an Raison." Maybe raison, yeah. That thai betorned up swa down. And there's up swa down. Up as down. So that's where upside down comes from. We do see variants that seem to be using the idea of adding side to up as early as the late 1400s, I think, like 1480s ish. And you also see variants with T, like as if it's upset down, like it's set up as if it were down. But the earliest one we have, and the one that we have the most variants of in Middle English, is some kind of variation of up, so down. So yeah, that's upside down. All right, now the next set of etymologies, which I think is the last set. There's only a few. I only got a few requests, and this is a set of English words that all have to do with sort of upwardness, and they are prepositions or adverbials, depending on the context they're using. And these are we're going to start with the term over. So over, I had a question about, like, where does over come from? It's kind of a weird sounding word. Now, over comes from Old English over. It's spelled with an F, but it's pronounced over because F between vowels in Old English sounds like a V. And this comes from the Proto-Germanic über that you see in other Germanic languages, like in German it's über, and that's like the U with the umlaut over it. And there are other Germanic cognates. And for Germanic, Proto-Germanic, I'm using a little evergreen tree emoji here, just to signal what it is. And then that little horse is Proto-Indo-European. I didn't feel like putting PIE every time, so I just put a little horse emoji instead. And the Proto-Indo-European form that we can tell seems to be something like uper or uperi. It depends on the language, whether there's an I there or not. And I'll explain why there's an H3 in parentheses in a little bit. But next to it, I've also put some other Indo-European cognates that come from this Indo-European root. And I have Latin, Ancient Greek, and Sanskrit, respectively. And I'm going to do that for all these Proto-Indo-European roots of English words here. Now, what's interesting in Latin is that there's an S that shows up. This in Latin is super, and that's where the word super, or the prefix super, comes from. And for whatever reason, in Proto-Italic, because I think this exists there's evidence of it in other Italic languages too, there's an S here. And we don't know why. They just added an S. Maybe there's some kind of, maybe a reflexive pronoun that was added to the beginning of this or something. We're not quite sure. But there's an S in Latin that's not there in the other languages. In Greek, it's, Ancient Greek, it's hyper, and that's where hyper, that prefix, comes from. And in Sanskrit, we have, it's upari there with an I. And there are variants in Greek that have an I there too, which is why we reconstruct possibly an I variant, because it shows up in Greek and in Sanskrit. But yeah, and all of these have this meaning of like over, above, that kind of sense. So these are all cognate from this Proto-Indo-European, I'm ignoring the H3, uper or uperi, something like that. Now, up is another one that's kind of has this same idea, this same semantic space, and this comes from Old English up, sometimes with one P, sometimes with two Ps. Originally, it probably had two Ps. In Proto-Germanic, it had two Ps. That's what seems to be the case when we compare it with other Germanic words. And it's likely, if we accept Kluge's law, which I'm not going to explain right now, probably from something like upno. And you'll see there's that H3 in parentheses again. So we see this same idea like up in Proto-Indo-European there with an H3 in parentheses. There's just some kind of different suffix here. And that in Proto-Germanic still means up. Now, another word that's in the same semantic space is above. Now, above comes from, there's sort of a variation between this in Old English, whether abuvan or onbuvan gets used, sometimes spaced out with onbuvan. Now, onbuvan, you actually see buvan sometimes, just buvan. And buvan is probably the prefix be that we see in a lot of English words, be, like in become or bespoke or bejeweled. That be prefix, that's probably that be prefix on uvan, and we do see uvan by itself. Now, uvan is interesting because it can mean on or above, but it can also mean under or down, which seems contradictory. Now, its origin is this Proto-Germanic adverb ubane, which is an extension of this word ub. It exists in some dialects of German, ob, not to be confused with the German word ob, which means if. It's a different word, ob, which in some dialects mean it has this older sense of like on or concerning, on the topic of, in older or regional dialects of German. But ub in Proto-Germanic means under or below, and it's uf in Gothic that we still see has that meaning, uf, under. We also have ufane from ubane in Gothic as well. And it comes from this Proto-Indo-European upo. And this is the origin of the Latin word sub, or the prefix sub, which means below or under, again with an unexplained s, like where'd that s come from? In Greek it's hypo, and that's where the prefix hypo comes from, not to be confused with hyper. Again, hyper is above, hypo is below. But it seems to be related if we look at the forms of these. And then in Sanskrit, there's a prefix upa that survives as a prefix in Hindi. It's up, and I'm sure in other Indic languages it does. I just don't happen to know, but I know up exists as a prefix in Hindi. And it means under. So ub means under in Proto-Germanic, but it had this weird thing where it kind of shifted to mean on top of. It kind of got flipped upside down in terms of its meaning a little bit in the Germanic languages. Now, all of these, you'll notice, have this H3 in parentheses. We can't tell if we compare the Germanic cognates and these Latin and Greek and Sanskrit cognates and other cognates in most other Indo-European languages, we can reconstruct the U initial words. So why put an H3 there? The reason there's an H3 there is because there seems to be some kind of evidence from Celtic that these terms might all come from a word, like a noun, potentially, or adverb, that meant something to do with height or being high. And the evidence from this comes mostly from Celtic. And the idea is that the root is something like this with an H3 here. And that all of these are zero grade, meaning the E that's in that root goes away. So you just have a U here, and the H3 doesn't really reveal itself in any of these words. Now, the idea of this root here, and you see there's an S there. There is a Greek adverb, hypsi, which means like on high or above, and that seems to be like the dative of location of some kind of noun, maybe upsos or something like that, or upsos. The reason for the H3 idea is this word that you see at the very end. That is the Irish word us, which means above or over. And it comes from this Proto-Celtic term. I wonder if you can see my cursor. It's the one that has the asterisk and then it's oxos, O-U-X-S-O-S, oxos. And if we're correct about the etymology of this word, it seems to imply some word like reupsos or something like that. H3's pronunciation is debated, but it probably was a labialized velar or uvular consonant, either fricative, probably a fricative, although there's some argue that it was actually a uvular stop of some kind. I think Clokhorst argues that it was like Kopsos or something like that, but usually it's reconstructed as something like more like Reupsos, with a o sound where you round your lips when you say o. And that's what causes that E to turn into an O that we see evidence for in the Celtic languages. There's other words that seem to come from this root, but this is the most obvious one because it yields the Irish word that also means above or over. So it has a similar meaning, but it might come from some kind of noun, like height, or that which is high, or something like that. Maybe a hopsis, or maybe a hopsos, or something The Celtic seems to be Oxos. So if that is the root, then all of these words here are related. Like this Greek word for on high, the Irish word for over, and all of these English words for over, up, and above all come from the same root. It's just that some of them mean above and some of them mean below, because both seem to have an idea of height baked into the meaning. So those were all the etymologies that I got requests for, other than catch up, because again, a lot of people talk about the etymology of catch up. I've never seen a video on the etymology of mustard. Now, moving forward, you'll notice I'm back. Hello. I said that at the beginning of the stream. I've been gone for a while. Lots of stuff has been going on outside of the streams, so I haven't been able to do a lot of streams. I've had some Patreon exclusive videos posted, but other than that, I haven't really been able to share anything. But I want to ideally be streaming more again. That should be feasible moving forward. I'm going to aim for at least 2 streams per month, maybe 3 if we're lucky. But I think 2 minimum is my goal. And we're going to alternate in a similar way that I was alternating with the content before my long pause. And yeah, so the idea is the alternation will be between yesterlore, journal video, and then conlang related videos. So today I did a yesterlore. My next video then will be a journal video. I have something really exciting to share in my journal actually for the next time. I've been using my journal quite a bit differently than I have previously. So I'm going to share that next time, maybe in 2 weeks. Or it's going to be either next week or in 2 weeks, depending on which one works out better. Probably 2 weeks from now, but we'll see. And then the next video after that, which may be in June, or it may be at the end of May, that next video after is going to be a conlang video. And I have a couple different options for that. There's quite a bit of conlanging stuff I've done in this interim period of not having streams. So I'm going to try to decide what I want to share first. So that is the sort of idea moving forward with the streams. I'm super happy to be back in streaming again. Thank you for anyone who was here in the chat today. It was great to see you. And if you are watching this in the future, again, if you have requests for things you want me to cover in yesterlore, please leave a comment in the in the comment section below. Thank you and farewell.